Welcome to the Young Hang Hot Rod Shop.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Young Hang Hot Rod Shop, where we take a look at what it takes to keep those beautiful PCP guns we have filled up with air and different ways to pressurize either our cylinders in the case of the Young Hang or directly to the gun in the case with this GX CS2 compressor. I've become a big fan of these little compressors, and I have a very interesting presentation for you today, and it is provided by the goodwill of one of my viewers and a Target Forge customer. It's great when I can say those two things together. He actually sent me this compressor, and he asked to only be named as a fellow air gunner. He is really unique in the air gunning world. I'm sure that when I tell you more about him, the list is going to get very short of who it could be, but he asked to be anonymous, so I'm going to keep true to his request. But he is a falconer and an air gunner and uses both of those skills to provide pesting services, and he has done so since 2008, roughly, and he is absolutely an outstanding gentleman. And he said, hey, Bill, how about if I send you a brand new GX CS2 and you take it apart on camera? And I thought, heck, that would be a lot of fun. And he goes, and you can keep the compressor when you're done. I'm like, wow, that is really big. I mean, I hope it goes together well. I'm pretty sure it will. But we're going to go through the steps here. The first thing we're going to do is get this unwrapped, get rid of all of this bubble wrap that's on here. And, my old favorite alligator clips. God, I hate these things. But we're going to get her hooked up, and we're going to do the very first thing that they ask us to do when we get these compressors, and that is to run them with the deadhead plug installed. We'll take a look at that in more detail when I get all this packaging off. But the purpose of that test is basically you're just going to pressurize this line, and it's kind of a time test. It should take around 20 seconds to do. And in doing that, you're kind of you're getting a benchmark or some kind of qualifying measurement that you can take on this compressor to know, to compare in the future. When you think you may be having an issue or you have an air leak or something, you can pop this deadhead in and see if the compressor's doing its job. So we're going to do that first, and then we're going to tear this thing apart and see what's inside and what makes her tick. All right, folks, here we go. We're going to plug in the AC supply. Hear that fan start up. We're going to connect the compressor. You hear its fans come on. And then we're going to energize it, make sure this vent valve is open. It is. Turn the power on. I think the compressor itself is actually quieter than all these fans. And now we're going to close the valve. That was actually really good. I'll check the time on the video and put that up on the screen. But that actually came up really quick. I think that was faster than 20 seconds. We know that this unit is good out of the box. We can attest to the wonderful quality report we have here. Inspector 03 did a great job. So I don't know what I'll do with this gold cord, but anyway, we know that it was inspected. I have been kind of critical about their documentation. It starts with the Amazon posting. It's not very well written for the Western market. It gets even worse when we get to the manual. In fact, in the Amazon posting, they tell you to ignore the manual. So it's useless. There is one. If you look on the Amazon page, it says more information. You click on that tab. There is a download to a more up-to-date manual on these things. But to be honest, it's not really. It's better, but it's not as good as it could be. So that's kind of the purpose behind taking this apart and seeing what makes it tick. So in the honor of a unnamed air gunner who just wanted to support the channel and support you, my viewers, and please do go in the comments and thank him and make your appreciation known that you appreciate this step. I mean, this is his money that he spent to send this, and I want to make sure that all credit goes to him for providing this. We're going to put this electrical stuff away. One other thing, I noticed a lot of people were asking, hey, where can I get filters for this after I run out of the ones that come in the bag? And that kind of sent me down a whole rabbit hole with this company. And fighting through some interpretation and language barriers, they have said that they're going to start offering these little filters and these larger ones on the Amazon page, or through Amazon. They're going to offer these filters. But I said, hey, what about the ones for the filter that you have here? Now, these are pretty common on Amazon, and maybe that's why they're being so obtuse about it. But they have no intention, I don't think, of supplying this filter, which I think is a mistake. This is the one that I change all the time. I rotate them out and dry them, and then I put them back in service because there really isn't a lot of oil coming through here. It's almost all water. But this little guy that goes in this gauge block that I featured in my first video on this compressor, I think changing this every 5 or 6 fills probably not a bad idea. And again, you can swap them out if you want, but sourcing these filters is kind of a pain. And some of you may be wondering, well, hey, what's this big filter for? Well, I didn't even know this, but inside this handle where the air intake is where this big filter goes. And if you live in some god-awful place like the middle of the Mojave Desert during a windstorm and you've just got to fill your air gun, you might actually clog this filter up. So they do give you some, and they're planning on offering these as a replacement. I'm like, honestly, I fill in pretty clean environments. I don't know how much I'll be changing that. I will check it from time to time, but it's going to take a lot to get that to clog up. But anyway, I'm trying to work with them to get them to provide all 3 filters, and so that you can purchase just the small ones and the larger ones that go in here. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to pull this handle off, and we're going to take a look at what it takes to change this intake air filter. That's it. Pop a new one in, screw the cap back on, and you're good to go. But let's get started and get into this. I'm going to change camera angles so you get kind of more of a downward view of this. But I think this will be fun. First thing we're going to take off is this cover. Well, that is beyond screwdriver tight. That is definitely wrench tight. These are sheet metal screws into cast aluminum, which that's obviously a cost-saving measure there. Let's cover off. Here we have the motor, and as I suspected in my earlier videos, this is the axis of the motor shaft, and there's definitely a gear reduction in this front housing. So we're going to go ahead and take this motor assembly off and see what kind of trouble we can get into here. They are really zonked on there. Somebody went and gave that one all the torques. Notice I did initially try to break those free with a ball end, but I stopped short of breaking the ball off the end of the T-drive, or otherwise stripping the head of the screw out, because ball end Allen wrenches are not meant for applying a lot of torque. This thing doesn't want to come out readily. So we're going to switch gears and attack this from the bottom, get this plate out of the way. Now, these are a rubber isolation block. Now I'm going to pop this nut off in the front here that I know I saw in the useless manual, that's what's utilized to access what formerly was a grease point, which now the manufacturer tells us that they have changed the design or found some magic grease. Doesn't actually need any maintenance. So there is a little retaining pin on this crank pin in here that I've gotten out with my retainer clip pliers. I'm going to focus now on this high pressure outlet block. Now this block is unique in that it can actually be one of the issues you might need to service down the road in the life of this. If you notice, the compressor is not coming up to pressure, and I've never had this problem. I only am referencing people who have posted on YouTube about other compressors that use the same pump mechanism that had an issue getting up to pressure. Like they just only made it to like 400 or 500 PSI or something like that. And a lot of times that is attributed to the check valve in here. We've got a spring right here. And then we've got the poppet for the check valve. And this is the high pressure outlet. So this is the one that isn't sealing when it needs to on the downstroke. So with those taken apart and out of the system, set those aside and let's take off this housing. So if you'll notice, this compressor is actually exactly the opposite of the Young Hang, in that the high pressure cylinder is on the bottom and on the Young Hang, it's on the top. So even though I was able to touch the top of this after a fill, I probably wasn't seeing the full temperature, but I did do thermal imaging in that first video where I introduced the Young Hang Killer, and it definitely was not overly hot. So I just don't think this guy generates a ton of heat. There is an O-ring in here. It is this O-ring seal. And here we have an interesting bit. Oof. Oofta, as Derek from Vice Grip Garage would say. That's tight. Probably not supposed to come out of there. Doesn't appear to be any thread locker. A little bit of grease on the surface there. There is a brass washer. It goes on the interface, but it looks like that's as far as we can go on the high pressure end. Let's take this top part off. These are not nearly as tight as those lower bolts were, except for that one. Again, inspector number 3 needs to do a better job of checking torque specs, because this certainly was not torqued with any care. All right. In the low pressure side, which is the intake, you can see this intake check valve right there with a bunch of grease and stuff on it. And I am going to take a moment and clean that out. That surface right there really doesn't benefit from grease. Again, not worried to get it super clean. I just don't think it needs a bunch of grease on that surface. But that's the input check valve. So when this piston travels downward, it's going to suck air through that filter in through that check valve and into the cylinder. And then when that cylinder reverses direction, it's going to come up, that check valve is going to close, and that pressure is going to build. And when I first looked at the drawing for this, I couldn't figure out for the life of me how they got that air back down into the next stage. And I think very cleverly, they have built the check valve into the top of that piston, and there's no external porting on this design. It just travels right through that center piston. Well, I have to admit, so far I'm a little perplexed on getting this motor case split, but I'm wondering if our answer maybe doesn't lie with this piston, or even this position of this piston. It may be that connecting rod needs to slide out, and that will only happen in the fully downward position. That's another possibility. But let's see what's going on with this upper check valve assembly. That pops off just like that. There's 2 more check valves in there, which must serve, I'm guessing, the air that gets pressurized in this piston flows through these 2 ports, and those are the check valves that keep it trapped on the high pressure side. If we look, we can see the tip of the high pressure piston right down in that hole. So here is the key to removing the wrist pin that connects the connecting rod to the piston assembly. You need to thread like an M4 screw in that threaded hole in the end of the rod, and then just simply pull it out. There we have it. And the groove goes in that way. So now, let's see if we can get these 2 halves apart. I think we've got to move the piston up. There it goes. Yahtzee. I think we got it, friends. That was it. That's the key. That piston has the skirt and it's notched out for the connecting rod. So in order to get this out, it's kind of a multi-step process. And I could imagine their manual getting quite wordy trying to tell you how to do that. But here we are at the connecting rod and the crankshaft, and I have to say, I am very impressed. This thing is built like a brick you-know-what house inside. I am not kidding you. So this fastener definitely feels like it's got thread locker on it. I'm going to try and take this off so I don't lose all of the bits that are in here, because they are a pain in the butt to put back together. But that, my friends, is a full-on needle bearing. And that is a bronze thrust washer. I have to say, that is pretty impressive design and manufacturing for the Chinese. Now, granted, the low end of a Young Hang is oil bath, but man, I will take that needle bearing all day long. It's got a nice grease in there. Absolutely no reason for anybody to be into one of these this far. At least that I can tell. There are literally no user serviceable parts in here. But we're in this for the fun, right? Could it be that this is the only fastener holding this whole thing together? It wouldn't really shock me. Yep. That's it. Look at that. I'll be honest with you. I was expecting this to be a nylon gear, but that is actually pretty high quality gear cutting in there. That's no joke. I am impressed. I'm going to goop some of this extra grease, kind of move it up into that pinion gear cavity so that it can spread it a little more effectively on these gear teeth. But man, that is pretty outstanding. As far as quality goes, I was not expecting that. So this little bushing actually came off and then dropped, and I thought it was one of the alignment dowels. It is not. Don't lose track of that if you end up in this deep, because that will that'll cause you some trouble. Get all those bearings in place before you try to put this housing back together, or you will be sorry. There we have it. Nice. Let's get this bolt back in there before I forget where it goes. So definitely order of operations matters when you're taking this guy apart. I'm going to put this connecting rod down at the 6 o'clock position so it gives me the most room up here to get this back together. You know, it might be a good idea now to slide this whole piston assembly out and kind of get a better idea what's going on there. This is the piston assembly. And it looks like we've got some high pressure seals here, which look like they are a split composite ring. They are split for sure. And this looks like a wiper type grease seal. But yeah, I'm thinking if you started to have your high pressure wear out, that's probably where you would look. It does drive the low pressure piston, does drive the high pressure piston, but you've got all of this thick material around here where this is supported. So that force is transmitted from the connecting rod through this wrist pin directly into that. So I'm not seeing any stress points on this. I say, well done, GX. This looks really cool. But before I get too far into it, I want to get it all put back together. Now, it used to be in the old manual that they would walk you through this greasing process, which they claim you don't need to do anymore. And I'm going to take them at their word. They know their design way better than I do. For some reason, they don't want anybody putting grease in this, which could be because some greases react with their seals, and that's why they don't want you in there. I really don't know. Maybe they've done some testing work, which, lo and behold, a Chinese company that actually tests stuff before they send it out. So, important to note, I put this seal on the low pressure piston up in here. You need to pay attention when you're lining this button head up with that little relief cut in the top of that piston. That's where that button head goes. And we're going to get these screws back in place. I'm going to hold this upside down so that that connecting rod wants to drop down in that hole. There we go. That's got it. Now, to make sure that both of these dowel locators down here have not moved and fallen down in the crankcase, because that's going to result in bad times for everyone involved if left floating around in there. Go ahead and throw these long screws in. I'm not going to tighten them yet. Only going down to just touching the top of the spring washers. Now I've got to get that hole for the wrist pin lined up. Remember, the short end with the slot goes in first. Sometimes you'll need to push back and forth on that piston assembly in order to get the wrist pin location to line up on the connecting rod. With that put in place, we're going to reapply the snap ring. That looks good. Piston check valve has been put back on the low pressure piston. The only thing left down here is this assembly. Remember that this is the check valve for the high pressure side. This is the seat. This was really, really tight. So it's going to go back in really, really tight. Make sure this O-ring is seated first. Again, just snug all four up to make sure there's even tension on the O-ring seal. And then just start skipping around the pattern, snugging them down. And then I'm going to go just a little bit more with them. I'm using my calibrated vice grip garage elbow. It's been calibrated by Derek himself. I'm lying. But we get that back in there. Give that a little snug. Clean off all that extra grease. In place, remember when this head goes back on, this threaded hole for the inlet handle, it goes to the back. So these things are really, I think they're really well built. And, I'm impressed that this is a 250 watt compressor. And that connecting rod looks like it's either steel or iron. The Young Hang, by contrast, is 1800 watts, and its connecting rod is cast aluminum. And I have seen them fail in epic fashion. Now, I'm not saying the failure was Young Hang's fault or the owner's fault for not lubricating it properly, but all I can tell you is if I have a choice between a cast iron connecting rod in this application and cast aluminum, I'm going to go with the ferrous metal solution. So we're getting close here. I'm going to throw the fans on. There's really not much glamour with screwing the fans back on, and I'm going to tighten up these interface bolts as well. And then I will come back and we will get the reassembled housing reassembled to the base plate. So one of the things that I had to do in order to get this wire off so that the motor and the compressor assembly were free from the base to make it easier for me to work on, I had to disconnect the circuit breaker. And the circuit breaker is held on with these two really, really crappy Phillips head screws. And I say really crappy because the head just isn't cut that well in them. Again, they're not a structural component, but the negative lead, just this bullet connector, just plugs that back together. And the positive lead needs to go in this screw terminal in the circuit breaker. So now that we've got this fastened, the negative connected, I just put these screws in there to keep them getting lost. We're going to slide this back in place. Line up those holes. This little rubber button goes right in the back side of the motor here. Next up, we're just going to replace this grease plug. Well, I guess now it's not technically a grease plug. It's an inspection port and a disassembly port, because without extracting that wrist pin out, you will not get access to the innards of this without really breaking it. All right. These get held in with dowel pins. Base goes on like this, and you want to pick up those long holes. Remember, these weren't overly tight, and I blamed inspector number 3, but I think that they're not meant to be really tight, which one could argue in a high vibration environment we should probably use a little Loctite on these screws. But this episode is more about assembly and disassembly, which is all we're going to do. I do have a little morbid curiosity in finding out what exactly these temperatures are down around this high pressure cylinder. And I think in an upcoming episode, I will thread a thermocouple probe in there right on the side of that cylinder. And you and I will see together what kind of temperatures that sees. Again, not going overly tight on these. Now, one thing I made sure I told everybody not to forget was to reconnect these fans. All right, here we go. We got everything fully assembled now, and we are going to do a official air up test. I've got the deadhead inserted in the quick connect, and we're going to fire it up and see how it does. Hear this fan first. This one. Turn the power on. Close the bleed valve. And it looks like we didn't screw anything up too badly. We were successful at tearing this all the way down and putting it back together again. And this is the first part in your video manual from your friends at Target Forge. And again, this is the GX CS2 compressor that we've had on the channel today. And I have absolutely fallen in love with this little guy. I'm not getting rid of my Young Hangs, and I'm not going to stop doing Young Hang content. We're going to certainly continue with that. But this episode was requested by a viewer. He supplied this compressor. And by gosh, we're going to keep our customers happy. So there you have it. If you're wondering what's inside of these, my opinion is that they are very well designed and very well assembled. And now I understand why I've had so few issues with mine and why so many people seem to be enamored with the quality of these. So we're going to wrap this episode up. Once again, check out our Patreon. Check out the Amazon affiliate links on some of the stuff that we used today. The Tool Check Plus set from Wera, I think it's a great deal, although it really didn't come in too handy on this. There weren't many fasteners that worked with that kit, but I love that kit for working on metric stuff. But the toolkit that comes with it is marginally effective. I showed you where all the filters go. The small filter that comes in your kit of filters goes inside this block. You have to pull this fitting off in order to change it. And your burst disc goes right in here. You just pop this out, pop another burst disc in, and close it back up. And that's your overpressure protection, just in case an attractive neighbor comes over and starts talking to you while you're airing up your really expensive Avenger, and you lose track of the time, and next thing you know, you hear a loud pop. Well, that's probably your burst disc. So again, you get a bag of them, and I have been hounding the manufacturer through their Amazon links to supply us with parts like the upper seal on that low pressure piston, and also the leading seal on that high pressure piston as well, and also the filters that keep this thing running. But that's it, friends. Remember, be a light in the darkness. It matters. Somebody needs your light somewhere. And we'll see you in the next episode.